The Jets stink. Let's talk about it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, November 20th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you enjoy the show and are watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. This helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And today we are here to recap a New York Jets loss, an ugly loss, as the Jets fall to the Buffalo Bills 32-6 yesterday up in Orchard Park. The Jets fall to 4-6 on the season. They are now on a 3-game losing streak. And quite frankly, they are lucky to not be on a 4-game losing streak. This team has been playing terrible football. And this was up there. You could argue week 2 against Dallas. This may have been the worst Jets performance of the season. And if it wasn't, it's top 2. The only one that compares is week 2 against Dallas. The Jets are completely outclassed in every phase of the game, really from the opening kickoff where Xavier Gipson fumbles away the opening kickoff. The guy who was the hero of the week 1 win over the Buffalo Bills because of his return prowess starts the Jets off on a terrible note in week 11 against Buffalo. He fumbles the ball away. The Bills get a field goal immediately. And, even though the defense actually made a good stop there, the Bills were off and running. The defense eventually fell apart. The offense was the offense. And, you're not necessarily finished at 4-6. I think you have to look at the way the team is playing in context. There are teams that have been 4-6 who have come back and made the playoffs in the NFL. But if we're being honest, the Jets look finished. The Jets look like a bad team right now. And I think through the season, you always have to recontextualize what you've seen to this point. After game 6 against the Philadelphia Eagles, the Jets had made it through the toughest part of their schedule with a 3-3 record. And it seemed like things were looking up for them. It seemed like this was a team that could make some noise. Well, what's happened since the bye, these 4 games kind of make me look back on what happened to this point in a different light. Because I'm looking back on this now and I'm saying, you know what? It's great that the Jets won those games. But the way they won those games, there was a lot that had to break right for them. And, you could start with week 1 against Buffalo where they get 4 turnovers and a punt return touchdown. And it's not that, you take away those plays, but you say that's not really a formula you can count on every week. You want to talk about the win over the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, 4 turnovers, 1 horrific interception by Jalen Hurts with just around 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter, to the point where it seems like the Eagles are about to win the game. Again, good play by the defense, good play by Tony Adams in that case, but I don't know that that's a formula you can count on consistently to win. Right after the bye, 2 weeks later against the Giants, Jets are down with like half a minute left. They've got no timeouts. They got the ball deep in their own territory, in part because, and the only reason they even got the ball was the Giants completely messed up the last minute of the game. Brian Dable's game management is so shaky. And they hit some passes. They're aided by a penalty. These things aren't what you can count on. The Jets don't really have a formula to win games right now. And that makes it difficult. You look at this offense. There's nothing really good about the offense. Garrett Wilson had a horrible game. Breece Hall's good, but he can't run with this blocking. The offensive line is a mess right now. And, a lot of it's due to injuries. The Jets have been once again decimated by injuries. It feels like every season we say the Jets can't suffer as many injuries on the offensive line as they did last year, and yet they always manage to. The Jets are playing a complete backup offensive line right now, and they lost Mekhi Becton. And Mekhi Becton, it's amazing. He's the last one who was, around on the offensive line. I guess Lagan Tomlinson's still there, but it's amazing that Becton lasted as long as he did with all the injuries going around this offensive line. This Jets can't do anything on offense if he can't block. And Jets can't block anybody because they're playing all these backups. And look, I don't want to let the Jets off the hook because their plan A on the offensive line was bad. They were depending on a 38-year-old tackle to stay healthy. They were depending on Mekhi Becton. There was a lot bad about the Jets' offensive line plan. And you kind of knew at some point you'd need to put guys in. The other thing is, they're guys they drafted who just don't look like they can play at all. Max Mitchell, we're 2 years in. The guy can't block. He was beaten for multiple sacks in this game. He's really not showing a whole lot of promise in his 2 years playing with the Jets. And all these things compounded. It's bad luck combined with bad decisions. And that's how you get to this point. And you're constantly reshuffling guys in and out every week. You're constantly putting in backups. You say what you will about the starters. There's a reason they're starting. They're usually better than the backups. The Jets are lowering their talent level, and they're pretty much destroying any chance they have of chemistry because they have to constantly shuffle guys in and out of this offensive line. You want to look at the receiver position. Allen Lazard is the number 2 receiver on this team. I can't believe this guy got $22 million. I can't believe people liked this signing. I remember watching 4 games of film on him in Green Bay last year, and I couldn't believe anybody would look back on this and say this was a good signing. He's just not that good of a receiver. And 1 target in this game, 1 horrendous drop in the red zone. I guess he did have a catch on a 3rd down play, but didn't count because of a penalty. But he's the number 2 receiver. What else do they have? They have Xavier Gipson, who is increasingly looking like he's just not a player. He's got speed. He had that 1 return against Buffalo, and what's Xavier Gipson bringing to the table? And part of the problem is the Jets are putting guys on offense that even somebody like me who does a daily podcast on the Jets, and there's some of these names I don't even recognize that they're putting on the field. Nathaniel Hackett, well, I think we saw what good putting him up in the booth did. He called the exact same game. The Jets needed big changes on offense this week, and their answer was to move the geography of their offensive coordinator. Their answer wasn't to make a change at offensive coordinator. The answer was to put him in a different location. Well, that's not going to work. Nathaniel Hackett's a bad offensive coordinator. We should have known that from what happened last year in Denver. The Jets took the leader of one of the few offenses that was worse than them last year and thought that he was the fix. And we know the real reason he's here because they thought he could get them Rodgers. Well, you're seeing one of the reasons that's not such a great. There are lots of reasons that was a bad idea. There are a lot of reasons that was an ill-advised plan. But you're seeing why. So you look at all these elements. Where are the wins going to come from? Sometimes you lose games. You see there's a path. There's a ray of light. There's reason for hope. I don't see how the Jets can win games because their offense is just so bad. Their offense can't win games when the defense plays well. And yesterday the defense was horrible. You can't win if you can't block anybody. You can't win if you don't have receivers who can separate. You can't win if you don't have a good offensive game plan. And of course, that brings us to the topic everybody wants to talk about, the quarterback position, where the Jets finally benched Zach Wilson. I've tried to go easy on Zach Wilson this year because it just kind of felt like last year was the end of Zach. They could keep him around. And of course he's back in the lineup because Rodgers is down. He can't transcend this. And if we're going to be honest, Zach's part of the problem. They benched him for Tim Boyle. It felt like maybe it was a long time coming. The offense got no better with Boyle. Is this the end of the line for Zach Wilson? Well, that's a topic we're going to discuss as we continue this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Perhaps the longest ranging story from this game will be the quarterback position. What will the Jets do going forward? They have a short week. Will Zach get back in the lineup? Did his play merit a benching? I say yes, and I'll talk more about that as we continue this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Maybe the Jets should check out LinkedIn Jobs as they try and find an offensive lineman or a quarterback or an offensive coordinator. They haven't done a very good job filling those positions. LinkedIn Jobs can be handy for them. It can definitely be handy for your small business. It's easy to create a free job post in LinkedIn Jobs, then add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. And this is why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes Monday through Friday and then bonus episodes as needed. We did one after the game last night. Not a fun one to do, but we do have episodes after games typically. Jets lose to the Bills 32-6. And one of the big storylines from this game is the benching of Zach Wilson. And I mentioned this last night on the show. Sometimes, like, you hear the quarterback was benched and he wasn't really benched. So, sometimes it happens with like 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter of a blowout, and they put the backup in to get the backup some reps, or they're trying to prevent the starter from getting hurt. This was not that case. The Jets clearly benched Zach Wilson for performance reasons in this game. They could deny it. I'm sure they will deny it. I'm sure Salah will come up with some company line that will be like, well, we wanted to get Tim Boyle a look, or we wanted to give Zach a chance to mentally refresh. He'll come up with something like that. But the Jets benched Zach Wilson in this game. It's something that was deserved. I don't think Zach Wilson's the number one problem with this offense, but he's certainly a problem. It's one thing to say that putting Tim Boyle in is not going to fix anything. It's another to say Zach Wilson's playing well. He's not. He's playing poorly. The question now, is this the end of Zach Wilson? That's been the working theory of a lot of people, that, the reason the Jets weren't benching Zach Wilson is that they were afraid that they'd lose him forever, that you can't go back to him. I don't really understand that argument, because it's not like the Jets have been afraid to bench Zach Wilson before. They benched him last year for Mike White before the game against Chicago. They benched him for Chris Streveler in the game against Jacksonville. They traded for Aaron Rodgers, which permanently put him on the bench, or at least so the Jets thought at the time. So the Jets have shown no hesitation to move on from Zach Wilson. Honestly, to me, they kind of turned the page on Zach Wilson once they put Mike White in that game against the Bears last year, because that was a sign they had no confidence in. They're right in the middle of a playoff race. That was a game that was set up to be a get-right game for Zach Wilson, and then went to Mike White. I mean, that says everything you need to know about what they think of Zach Wilson going forward. I think they had to present a positive front for Zach once he became the starting quarterback again. That's different from saying they actually believe he's the future of the team. So I have two arguments to make about this. Number one is they've already benched him a lot, so I don't see why one additional benching means they can't go back to him. The second is I don't think they want to go back to him, at least long term. I think that they've evaluated the situation and they've said he's the best of our bad options, but I don't know whether that's even true at this point. And I think that the Jets are going to have to make a more permanent change at quarterback. I say this all the time, that when you are making a change, there has to be a better alternative, or sometimes you just get into such a bad situation that you have to make a move for the sake of making a move. You have to try and find a spark. You have to try and do something. And I don't think that Tim Boyle's a better option. I don't think Trevor Siemian's a better option. But I do think we're to the point where this offense is so bad that they just have to try and do something. And they have to make a big change. You just can't go forward with the same status quo when the offense is performing this bad. They've scored 2 touchdowns in the last 4 games. They're 1-3. They should be 0-4. I mean, if we're going to be honest here, this team is incredibly lucky to not be on a 4-game losing streak. And, you could even go back to the Philly game, which felt like it was lost. But let's just talk about after the bye. Jets have lost 3 games. They should have lost 4. And the offense is doing absolutely nothing. I mean, they've had 2 touchdown drives since the bye. One was Breece Hall taking a short pass to the house. Another was on a drive where they needed a fake punt to extend it, and they needed a 4th down conversion. This offense just can't do anything. And it's not Zach, but we've already mixed up the offensive line enough. There's really no options at wide receiver. I mean, Xavier Gibson's taking on a bigger role. We're seeing how well that helps. And I don't want to get too hard on Gibson because he's a non-drafted rookie. You're not expecting much from him. You're not expecting him to ever be much of a player. I mean, he's already given you more than you could ever expect from a non-drafted rookie because he won you a game on a punt return. It's all house money from this point with Xavier Gibson. There really are no options. What, you want to put Jason Brownlee in there? The thing they have to do is they just have to try and, they have to do something big. So there are really 2 options. You can change the coordinator, change the play caller, or you can change the quarterback. They should do both, I think. Nathaniel Hackett's, they moved him to the booth and there were no changes to what the play calling was. Literally, I don't think anything changed about the play. It wasn't a case where Hackett saw the field better. And I think sometimes the difference between the booth and the sideline gets exaggerated. I do think that there are areas where, there's benefit to being on the booth versus being on the sideline and vice versa. It very much depends on the player. It depends on the team. but that was your big change. That's not good enough. They need to change play callers, but I think you also need to change quarterbacks. Look, I think we know that Tim Boyle, Trevor Siemian, these guys are not leading the team to the Super Bowl. Sometimes you just got to make a change. Sometimes you just have to send a message. Sometimes, guys will get fired up. And it's not necessarily a negative commentary on the current quarterback. You do it because it shows. I hesitate to overuse this word, but you just have to show guys that there are going to be people that put on the bench if you don't perform, that we're willing to make changes. Sometimes you got to do that. And maybe it can get you through a game or two, because right now this season looks like it's on the verge of collapse. And quite frankly, we might be in the middle of that collapse. It's ugly right now for the New York Jets. And I mean, is this the last time we'll see Zach Wilson on the field? Maybe. But I just think the Zach Wilson era, for all intents and purposes, ended last year. That was the last point where it was realistic to think that Zach Wilson was the quarterback of the future for the New York Jets. So at this point, I mean, I'm not really worried about how Zach Wilson feels. The fact he's still in the lineup is kind of a coincidence. I think they moved on from him a long time ago. So I'm not really worried about losing Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson was lost. And even if he wasn't lost, if you look statistically at what Zach Wilson's done in his career, if you look at the performance, if you look at, just the film where he is as a passer, he's got a long way to go. And it's very unlikely he's ever going to amount to being a good quarterback in this league anyway. So I just don't think it's as existential as people are making this out to be. Zach Wilson probably wasn't going to succeed anyway. And I don't think another benching is going to change anything. I think the Jets' odds of making the playoffs now are pretty low. They're in 14th place in the AFC. They're 2 full games out with 7 to play. You have to jump 7 teams in the next 7 weeks to make the playoffs, and that requires winning a lot of games. So I don't think the odds are very good, but you still have to try. I mean, you're still mathematically alive, and I don't think there's any other way right now. They just have to hope that one of these bad options of quarterbacks pans out for them. Of course, it's not just about the quarterback. Lots of bad performances by the Jets in Week 11 against the Buffalo Bills. The defense did not come to play. Some of the best players on the team played their worst games. As we continue this Monday edition of Locked On Jets, we're going to talk about the guys who failed in this game. It's not a pleasant topic, but it's one that's necessary to talk about if we're going to break down this one. And I'll tell you who played poorly as we continue this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by DoorDash. It's Thanksgiving week. You're probably going to have to cook later in the week. So you don't want to have to spend too much time in the kitchen early on in Thanksgiving week, especially coming off a Jets loss. I mean, you got enough to deal with. Let DoorDash bring you a great meal. DoorDashers travel all over the New York area. They'll bring you food from the best restaurants out there. And you know that there's a lot of great dining in New York. Like the original Venice Rest in the Bronx. It offers exquisite dining, takeout, and delivery. The Original Venice Restaurant is a Bronx institution known for its great Italian cuisine, good service, and welcoming staff. This restaurant is known for its innovative take on classic recipes and commitment to only using the highest, freshest ingredients. And there are so many other great restaurants. New York's one of the great food cities in the world. You can get anything you want. Or if you want something more familiar, if you want something from a chain restaurant like the Cheesecake Factory, DoorDash has you covered. And right now, we've got a great deal for you. You can get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. Again, that's 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. It's one word, no space, LOCKED, number 2, number 3. Subject to change, terms apply. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Monday. The Jets fell yesterday to the Buffalo Bills 32-6, a game that was not very competitive. I mean, even early on in the first half, the Bills jumped out to like a 9-0 lead, and that felt insurmountable. And the way the Jets offense is playing, it just wasn't going to work. We mentioned, and this was a failure in all 3 phases. We started the game off with a fumbled kickoff return by Xavier Gipson. The defense held firm on that first Buffalo drive and forced a field goal, but that did not last very long. The defense, especially in the second quarter and third quarter, I mean, they gave up a lot. Buffalo scored 10 in the second, 13 in the third. It was just an ugly performance, aided by a Zach Wilson interception on one of the scores, but an ugly performance by the defense. The vaunted defensive line, which I don't say that sarcastically. The Jets' defensive line has been very good this year, especially with the breakouts of Jermaine Johnson and Bryce Huff. But the defensive line only recorded 1 sack in this game. Quinnen Williams, who deserves more sacks. Quinnen Williams has played great this year. The sack numbers haven't really been there. Quinnen had 1 sack, but the Jets defense otherwise did not get to Josh Allen. There were lots of bad performances in this game. CJ Mosley, I thought, had an uncharacteristic bad game. He whiffed on a couple of tackles. The real culprit, though, on defense is maybe the best player on the team. If not, then top 3 player Sauce Gardner, who was beaten for a long touchdown, committed a bad penalty. I don't know what happened with Sauce yesterday. I mean, I'll just chalk it up to a bad game. He's allowed to have them. The problem with the Jets is, again, even when everybody's playing at their best on defense, they still can't win games. So when their best player or one of their top 2 players on defense has a bad game, they really can't survive it. And that's what happened in this one. The bad performances all the way around. I thought even Quincy Williams, who's been great this year, had a few rough moments within this one. And part of it's, you got to give credit to Joe Brady, the new offensive coordinator for the Bills, because, we talked about this last week. We talked about it with Joe Marino. We talked about it on Friday. This Jets defense is built to give Josh Allen headaches because Josh Allen becomes impatient sometimes. This Jets defense, they're very enticing. They'll let you have the short gain. They'll let you have the short gain all day. The theory behind it is that eventually you'll get impatient and the defense will take that away. And Joe Brady got Josh Allen to play within himself. Josh Allen, he did hit the one big touchdown pass, but other than that, I mean, he really played within it. He did not force things down the field. He just took what the Jets gave him, and it worked plenty well for Buffalo in this game. And part of it was, again, a bad game for Sauce. And of course, on the offensive side of the ball, nobody played well. Breece Hall was the only good Jets offensive player in this game. To the extent the Jets had any offense in this game, it was Breece, and it was really Breece receiving because on the ground he only had 10 carries for 23 yards, and there was one run for 14 yards. So his other 9 carries netted 9 yards. Obviously, that's not going to get it done, but he did add 50 yards through 5 catches in the passing game, and he had a bad drop in the first half, but that's just Breece. Breece is going to drop passes. He doesn't have the greatest hands, but Jets don't really have many other mechanisms to move the ball other than try and throw him the ball in space, because that seems to be one of the things that works best for them. On offense, the culprit, unfortunately, there are lots of culprits. The one that really stands out to me, though, is Garrett Wilson, because he's one of the few players you expect to be good on that side of the ball, and he really was not. I mean, Rasul Douglas dominated him, and Rasul is the kind of defensive back I feel like could give Garrett problems because Garrett's a little undersized. Douglas is a very physical corner, and that was pretty much the story of this one. Jets did not do a great job trying to get Garrett away from him. They did not do a great job trying to put Garrett in positions to succeed. But, at the end of the day, Garrett just lost his matchups. And, you can blame it on the quarterback. Obviously the quarterback play was not very good, either Zach Wilson or Tim Boyle. But at the end of the day, Garrett only had 2 catches for 9 yards. He fumbled away a ball for the second time in 3 weeks. I mean, the interception Zach Wilson threw was a bad decision, but I felt like Garrett could have tried to work back for the ball a little bit better. It just wasn't that great of a game. And we know this offense can't work when Garrett Wilson's playing well. Even when Garrett Wilson's, throwing up 90, 100 yards, this offense is challenged for points. When one of the 2 good players on the offense has a bad day at the office, there's not a lot that can be done for this team. And I don't want to get too hard on Garrett. I mean, the two guys I think should not be criticized heavily for this, even when they have a bad game, are Garrett and Breece, because they're the only guys who give anything positive to this offense. But I think it's clear that, when the units you're counting on can't perform, and that's the defense, that's Sauce. And on offense, when the guy you're counting on, Garrett, has a bad game, there's not a lot that's going to go well for the Jets, and you'll get a blowout loss like this. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Hope you have a great Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.